Hello and welcome back to the AI with Maribel Lopez program. Today I'm joined with John Roese, who is the Global Chief Technology Officer and Chief AI Officer at Dell. As if one job weren't enough, they gave you two, but those two are so aligned these days. John and I have spoken about many things at many times. John, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for spending the time. I'm going to jump right in. I know you don't have a lot of time. Dell sits at a very interesting intersection. You're both a major tech vendor and you're also a huge enterprise running AI at scale internally. And we've spent some time discussing the whole move to AI agents and where they're actually delivering value now, where they're not. And you've done some great work in this space. And after talking to you about it a few weeks ago, I thought it'd be great to share how you're thinking about agents. So you built a framework from real production deployments, not pilots, not proof of concept. But before we get into the framework itself, which I think is fascinating, what were you seeing in the market that made you feel enterprise leaders were, focused basically on the wrong things when we're thinking about AI agents?
Yeah. I mean, the first go round when agents materialized in, let's call it mainstream, we knew they were coming. We were doing stuff a long time ago, but when they started to get into the discussion of affecting business, people really wanted to map them to org charts. They wanted to have this concept of agentic teams, that you'll have a bunch of AI employees working for you. And all those might kind of directionally be correct, but they were not correct when you look at how the technology actually works. We realized very quickly that an agent isn't a human being. In fact, a human being is a very complex entity. Any human job is not a single thing. It's a bunch of different things, and that's what our framework kind of tries to decompose, that come together as a person doing a job. But when you start talking about an agentic system, which is an AI that can do work, you have to be very specific about what work it's going to do. And generally, you don't tell it to simultaneously go solve some, data management problem and write poetry. You would never. That just makes no sense when dealing with an AI the way we think about it. And so we realized very quickly that we had to shift from this idea of, an AI is an anthropomorphized human, and it should be thought of as a employee, to it is really a vehicle to do work. And in fact, one of the biggest observations we had as we move into agentic, which is a pretty important one, is what is going to happen in the agentic cycle is that we are decoupling human capacity from work capacity for the first time ever. We have an ability to do more work than we have humans to do. And if you think, that's not how we've worked for the last 50 years. You need more work done, you hire more people, you put more people on it, you apply scale. This decouples it. And because of that, we just had to think about it differently and try to get away from our preconceived notions of how work is done, because the agents and agentic capability has this effect of changing that fundamental relationship of, for X amount of humans, you can accomplish X amount of work. That just simply isn't true in the agentic world. And that forced us to rethink everything.
It's a bit like when we went into the Industrial Revolution and we started thinking about like the manufacturing facilities. It was like all of a sudden it wasn't just one or two people trying to build something. You could do it much more at scale, and that caused you to rethink how you do things. So that's a great way to set this up. So you have a two by two framework. I love two by two frameworks for an analyst. We love two by two frameworks, and you map your agent categories against these dimensions: complexity of work, degree of autonomy. Let's start by talking about like the bottom left and just walk us through it.
Yeah. I mean, this is a moving target, but we have a after really looking. By the way, the way this happened was not we had this brilliant epiphany that there's a two by two matrix that describes agents. It was, we've been using agents for a while, and we started to see patterns, and we started to realize that those patterns were somewhat repeatable, and they started to describe something very different than every agent is a snowflake doing a unique job. They started to create commonality. That's a good thing. We like commonality. We like reusability. So what came out of it were that as we looked at these patterns, two dimensions kind of emerged. The first dimension, let's just call it the x-axis, is the degree of autonomy. This idea that, how much reasoning do you really want the agent to do? And in some cases, you don't want to do much at all. You just want it to automate a process that already exists, and it doesn't have a lot of freedom of thought. You're giving it not just an objective, but a whole bunch of rules about how to do that thing. And because it's a machine, it does it faster than a human being. On the other end of that x-axis is you are giving it a general objective and assuming its reasoning logic will figure it out. It can be creative. And in fact, it will do the job differently, possibly every time, but you believe that it has enough data and reasoning logic to accomplish that. So that's the x-axis. So on the y-axis, we realize because agents are an entity that does work, work comes in different forms. And in fact, some of the work you do is quite simple and is tied typically to a single process. Like, a great example is I want to use an agent to book travel. Well, that's not a complex thing, to be perfectly honest. It's pretty well defined how you figure out what flight you're going to take. And I mean, there's work to be done, but the bottom line is that process is pretty simple. On the other end of the spectrum, you could deal with very complex multidimensional processes. And those would be things like, I want to build an entire product through a supply chain, or I want to develop a piece of software, or and we have an example inside of the company, I want to go make quoting automated. That's not a single process. That's dozens of processes working together. And so we immediately saw this kind of continuum that, if you take those two dimensions and put a 2x2 matrix on it, it actually manifests as 4 boxes. In the bottom corner, you have productivity agents, which are really applying essentially a degree of autonomy, but not great autonomy, to well-defined processes. In fact, almost all the agents people experience today are that. We have dozens, if not hundreds of them running inside of Dell, and they're adjacent to other systems, and they bring autonomy to them. And their goodness, but by and large, they just make humans a bit more effective. They're not real high degrees of autonomy. They're not taking over the work. On the lower right-hand corner, though, where you have high autonomy but simple processes, you start to see what we describe now as hygiene agents. This idea of agents that can be given a task that is not that interesting, but they're able to work through it and navigate it with almost no human supervision. And there's all kinds of those in businesses. Think about anywhere where your data's a mess. Why haven't you cleaned it up? Well, it costs a lot of money. You don't have people. It takes time. Well, agents are pretty good at reasoning through things. If you give them the objective to clean up a data set, they'll just run forever in the background and eventually solve that problem for you. There's a lot of that work. And in fact, what we discovered is most of it wasn't even being done. We were just settling for inefficiency because we couldn't find a good way to use humans to solve it. Okay, then you jump up a
Gave
little
a
bit.
great example of that though, and I think this is a really perfect time to talk about that, about like CRM data.
Oh,
Tell us
yeah.
a little bit about that.
Yeah, one of the first areas we discovered is in the CRM space, and this is it's a funny statement. All CRM data is inaccurate. Okay, I'm just going to say that. Unless you only have one CRM record, and it's the very first time you've ever done anything, CRM data by definition is inaccurate because it's not the CRM tool's fault. It's a data set, and it's designed to keep track of your customer relationships. In order to do that, you have to rely on human beings doing a bunch of work, making sure they fill it in, making sure they put accurate information in there. The problem is if CRM data becomes inaccurate, most people think of it as, oh, it's just a tool. No. It's the foundation of your customer relationship. It's how you decide how your salespeople are going to be deployed, how you run campaigns. So many things depend on accurate CRM data, yet universally, I've yet to find anybody who says their CRM data is perfect. It's bizarre, but yet and when you ask why, well, I want my salespeople selling, not cleaning up CRM data. I can't afford a whole bunch of consultants to come in and clean it up for me, and that would only be a one-off. But if you think about an autonomous agent, give it the right information, give it an objective, give it access to the tool, it can do that work. It's not very sophisticated work, but it requires reasoning because how do you fill in the right answer about the size of the customer? That's a reasoning problem. It's not you can't script it. It's not that easy. And so the reality is we've found that in things like that, you have an opportunity to really, really change the way that like foundational data quality exists. But again, it wasn't something anyone was doing today because it was too hard to do with people. But now we have autonomous agents, and when you apply them to actually relatively boring, simple things, but leverage the fact that they can do reasoning and they need a high degree of autonomy to do this, they can actually start to make those problems disappear for the first time ever, which is pretty interesting overall.
I love this concept of the hygiene agent. I think every company can use it. You also, when we were talking about this, we also discussed the concept of using latent capacity. That maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's not just tied to hygiene agents, but in general, what we've realized is, agents aren't necessarily time bounded. They don't actually, many of the things you want to do actually can't be done instantaneously. Like imagine you have an agent that is, its job is to keep track of all the customer meetings that happened this week and tell me about it. As a CTO of the company, I'd like to know what all our customers are saying. I can't be in all those meetings. I can clearly build agents that can go and do that work. Um, I don't need an answer in 5 seconds. It's not an instantaneous answer. It's an ongoing running process to kind of gather information, organize it. And I'd be perfectly happy if at the beginning of the week it told me what was going on, and at the end of the week it told me what happened, and it would make me way more productive. And if I didn't have to do any work in the middle, that'd be great. And because of that, just like the application of agents to CRM and other tools, you start to realize because they're not time bounded, and more importantly, because the value of each action it takes is actually quite low. You have a situation where if it costs a lot of money to do these on a per unit basis, that could be problematic. Like the CRM thing, if it costs me like $5 a record to clean it up, that is not affordable. I have millions of records. I'm not going to do that. So how do we get these to free? And we discovered something interesting. We're big proponents of, hybrid architectures. We believe that you should own some of the infrastructure yourself, not all of it. But in AI, more and more we're finding having dedicated infrastructure gives you not only performance and control and regulatory advantages, but it actually gives you an interesting cost advantage because you typically deploy your AI systems to go solve the big important problems. And we've talked about that. That's what we're doing at Dell. But those GPUs don't run at 100% utilization. So what if on that system you didn't just leave them idle when the big jobs weren't running? You just used basic scheduling. And you said these agents need to accomplish their task over a period of time. And why don't we just run them in the white space on the GPUs we already own? Now, you can't do that with a cloud model because you're still going to get charged for every transaction in and out of a cloud service or an API. But if you own the GPUs and you are running the models locally, it is effectively just the cost of power to run all of these hygiene agents, which again is important because it brings the I in the ROI down to almost zero. And so if I told you the per unit cost to clean up a CRM record is now cents, you'd be very excited. But if it was dollars, you would be very concerned. And so, it's kind of an interesting learning. When you do agentic and you deploy work, it's not get the work done at any cost. It's get the work done in an efficient way. And that correlates to not just the cost of the technology, but the cost to operate the technology. Agents don't run on magic. They run on infrastructure. And if you control the infrastructure and you have white space you can reuse and you can put agents into that white space, you can create economic models that aren't achievable any other way. You wouldn't do that for everything, but it gives you another lever about how you'll actually deploy these technologies. There is an analogy to this. We always in companies looked at the cost structure of our workforce. We had what we called high cost environments, which we were, certain countries and certain skill sets. And then we had lower or best cost environments where we wanted to cost arbitrage. Well, guess what? Agents do work. Having that approach is incredibly important, but you don't do it the same way. You do it based on which infrastructure you run it on and what the economics of that infrastructure are. So for us, it's pretty exciting because it says, boy, if you own your own GPUs for some other reason, you have the platform already in place to probably run armies of hygiene agents and coordination agents and productivity agents that just run in the background and they just produce value. And they do it on an infrastructure that you already are using for something else.
Okay, so we've got two of the buckets, and I've thrown you off the course a little
Yeah.
bit, but
Let
that's
me
way off
let,
the
let me
conversation.
jump up to the top line. So the bottom ones were all about really simple singular processes. The top is all about complex processes. But there we found that there were two different types of agents or classes of agents. On the left-hand side, where we're talking about an agent with limited autonomy, you're not asking it to figure everything out, but you are asking it to interact with and guide a complex process. We call those essentially facilitator or coordination agents. And what we found is this pattern where sometimes the agent isn't the thing doing the work. It's the thing that makes all the things that do the work better. Think about how many processes in your company cross organizational boundaries, go between different systems. And just what we found, every time that happens, things break down. Inefficiency occurs, whether it's in a factory when you have a shift change or when you hand off an account between sales reps, or if you're trying to navigate a service problem where it crosses, between you and a partner. These things are a source of intrinsic inefficiency in enterprises. And what we started to discover is the reason they're inefficient is nobody's really paying attention to make the actual process, which you've already defined, actually happen. And because they're in that left-hand side, they're not reinventing how you do these things. They're taking the process as you want it to happen, and you're making the agent have the objective to get that done. Now, you have to give it tools. In many cases, we have to have it talk to people. So it talks over Teams and Slack and other interfaces. It has to be able to understand data. It usually has some level of knowledge graph that understands how that process should work, what we've learned from it, how to troubleshoot it. But what we found is when you put that kind of 7 by 24, 365, very focused machine in the center of a complex process and teams doing it, it makes sure that things don't break down. It is driven by the objective to finish this task in 6 days or to accomplish this outcome financially or something else. And honestly, it removes the natural entropy that exists in companies. If you go and measure that in any process you have that's complex, you will find that entropy accounts for almost all the inefficiency. If it went away, in most cases, these processes not only happen accurately, but they happen faster and more efficiently. Then you jump over to the final box, which is the upper right. That's it's always the goal. And we call those expert agents, expert workers. These are things where you are taking a complex process and you are giving the agent autonomy to do it better. And we've run studies. We've looked at thousands of jobs and asked agents to interpret the work that's being done today and ask, could I actually do it better? Could I simplify the processes? At Dell, we have a very serious focus on process reengineering for the AI world because the processes can change. Interesting enough, when you go to an expert worker, though, you're not hard coding the process. You're arming it with enough information that it can figure out how to do very complex work. Now, the problem with that is if it sounds complex, it is. It requires deep data sets. It requires wisdom and knowledge about it enumerated in knowledge graphs and other tools. It requires a very advanced reasoning capability. It requires broad tool use. And in almost all cases, it's what's called a MAS, or a multi-agent system. It requires multiple agents working together. Because it is so complex, sometimes I joke, it's like building the Terminator or something. You got to build this science fiction-like thing. We are building some of those, but they're very hard. And so one of the aha moments for us was in that 4 quadrants, we were spending a lot of time on productivity stuff and trying to build a few experts. And we missed that these other 2 boxes existed. And once we realized that we were inadvertently doing them, we said, maybe those are actually the easier path. And they guide us towards getting all of the data intact and reimagining the work. And ultimately what comes out of hygiene and coordination agents is the path to expert workers. But we aren't there yet. And so anyway, the punchline is this may change a bit, but that framework or something like it that characterizes not the technology of the agents, but the kinds of work that they do against the kinds of work you want done has been very helpful to kind of describe to our businesses what to go look for, how to decode what you want to do with Agentic, as opposed to this white space discussion of go figure out how to use agents in your business. This helps people say, well, why don't you start with this and figure out if you have this kind of work going on? And if you do, it's very likely that the agents that you choose will be able to do that kind of work because we already know they can.
And I think so when when we talk about it, you're right, everybody's doing productivity agents, but that concept of the hygiene, one of the biggest issues organizations have is data. Do you have the right data? And if you don't have the right data, all the rest of the AI just goes out of the window, right? So I think the hygiene agents can really help with you getting to that right set of data. And then the facilitation, what's so interesting about that and the coordination is, we talk a lot, or at least I talk about changing business processes and workflows now that we have AI. Well, before you can get to that, just making what you're doing more efficient and having that be more effective is a great first step. And it's not so onerous as an organization to move to, right? And you get more trust around the technology, because that's the other big thing. We don't trust the technology because sometimes it does go off the rails.
Exactly.
You don't know exactly when.
One of the most interesting things that we found when we first built the first coordination agents, we were very nervous because it looked like what we were building was an agentic boss. And I don't want to do that. I like people being in charge. And we were concerned that, well, the agent's going to coordinate the team. And then we realized, oh, no, it's not. In fact, the agent gets its knowledge from an actual human being who knows how to coordinate the team. What the agent is simply doing is scaling the knowledge that your best people have. So think about the best manager you have, the best leader you have, and imagine if their thought process, their approach to dealing with things, their knowledge was expanded or scaled by using agents to essentially allow them to influence more teams. So it became a scaling factor, not an autonomous boss. The actual decision about how to do X or Y, if it's to transition a sales team, the sales leadership decides how to do that. They just don't have the resources, time, or coordination to go do that effectively every time it happens. But if a set of agents can scale that, make sure their objective is met, that's actually very good. And so, by the way, it also creates an appeals path. If you're a worker and you have an autonomous agent kind of helping coordinate, and you're like, I don't really like what it's doing, you don't have to argue with the agent. Call the person who told the agent what to do, and they can change the prompt. I mean, it's you're still in control, because there's this fear. It looks like these things are taking over. They're becoming significantly larger in the organizations. They're playing bigger roles, and they are doing more work. But I've always said the two things that look like they're going to remain very human for a long time, of the three things that are involved in doing stuff, which are intent, action, and validation, intent and validation, even in everything I just described, is distinctly human. The action in the middle changes dramatically. How the work gets done, who does the work, what does the work, whether it's coordination work or hygiene work or productivity work or expert work. But at the end of the day, somebody decided what to do, and somebody is going to have to confirm that it did it correctly, because we don't trust black boxes. And so anyway, it was an interesting journey, because we literally didn't talk about hygiene agents for a while, because we got or coordination agents, because we got nervous that, is this really turning control over to an AI, or is it something else? And once we started to use them, we're like, oh no, the agents can't do anything. They don't know what to do unless humans tell them what to do and give them information and are there to guide them, but they scale what those people know in a way that we've never been able to do before.
I love that, because that's probably the clearest definition I've heard of what the human does versus what the agent does, and how they can both be very valid in their own right and will both continue to coexist. Let's wrap up. I know that there's so many things we could continue to talk about, but if you had to give organizations one or two pieces of advice of either where to start or what to do or what not to do, what would you tell an enterprise listening to this?
Yeah, two things. The first is, well, it's okay to experiment and play with what you think are agents. You should not do that as your strategy. You should really pause and decide. Once you understand, go play with agents to learn what they are, but don't assume that's your strategy. Once you know what they are, take a big step back and look at your business, whether you use this framework or another, and ask the question, where would I have the biggest impact if I applied them? Is it data cleanup? Is it coordination? Is it just simply making my people more productive? Have some objective in mind. And then the second one, which I'm a broken record on this one, prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. Do not do 1,000 of them. Do not let this loose everywhere with no governance and no controls. You may do that eventually after you know what you're doing and have the platforms and governance in place. But the bottom line is, first thing is become literate. Second thing is, don't take your literacy as a strategy. Use that to then find the business process. And third, pick a few of them and get them in production and measure that they can produce a material impact to your business. When you're through those first three steps, then you can scale. And that's been the principle from day one in AI that we discovered, and I think we've started to repeat. Agentic is no different, but the only thing that I will say is a little different. The speed in which you can do this is dramatically faster. Agents are a low-code, no-code experience. The platforms already exist. You do not need to be a deep expert in developing your own tools, but you do need to have the expertise to know how to use those tools. And hands-on experience, a thoughtful targeting exercise, and a prioritized set of first projects help you develop that expertise.
John, always insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your insight with us today.
No, great to be here. I'm sure this will not be the last time we talk about this topic, so it's going to be fun to see how it plays out.
Look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Thank you.